The Invisible Empire, the Ballad of the Silent City and the Unseen Power. Imagine a secret so vast, so profound, it changed the course of World War II, altered the balance of global power forever, and yet, for years, remained hidden behind a thin veneer of ordinary American life. It was an illusion of the mundane, a city that did not appear on a single map, a place where scientists wore badges with fake names, where mail was censored, and where the simple act of looking out a train window was forbidden. This was not a prison camp. It was the birthplace of the atomic age. Its existence was a lie told to the world, to its own residents, and, in many ways, to history itself. This is the true, untold story of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, the beating heart of the Manhattan Project, and the ordinary people who unknowingly built the most destructive weapon the world had ever seen, all while living under the shadow of the greatest secret in human history. A secret that, once revealed, would define the American century. This is the tale of the Secret City, a place born of sheer necessity, scientific genius, and military paranoia, where the stakes were nothing less than the survival of democracy against the rise of fascism, and the prize was the unimaginable power of the atom. From the dirt roads of East Tennessee to the sterile labs of New Mexico, and finally to the desolate skies over Japan, this is the story of how an entire nation mobilized its brightest minds, its deepest resources, and its profound, sometimes terrifying ambition to win a war, and in doing so changed the fundamental nature of existence. Part 1. The Genesis of Secrecy, the Hill and the River. The land itself was a contradiction. In 1942, the rolling hills of Anderson County, Tennessee, were sleepy, agrarian, and deeply Southern. The Clinch River flowed languidly through the valleys, its banks marked by the ancestral farms of families who had worked the soil for generations. It was a place where life moved at the pace of the seasons, far removed from the desperate, mechanized terror gripping Europe and the Pacific. Yet, in the minds of a handful of physicists and military engineers, this quiet, unassuming landscape was about to become the epicenter of a revolution. The choice of site, initially codenamed Site X, was anything but accidental. The military needed three things in abundance: land, water, and electricity. Land because the experiments would be massive, messy, and potentially catastrophic. Water because the processes required enormous cooling capacity. Electricity because the theoretical method for separating the fissile material, uranium-235, would demand more power than many American cities combined. Tennessee offered all three. The government had quietly condemned over 56,000 acres of land, displacing hundreds of families whose histories were instantly erased for national security. They were given mere weeks to pack up their lives, their ancestors' graves, and their heritage, all for a project whose nature was only ever vaguely described as a war effort installation. The speed and cold efficiency of the seizure was the first chilling indication of the sheer scale of what was to come. The man tasked with overseeing the impossible was Colonel Leslie Groves, a massive, brilliant, and notoriously abrasive engineer who had just finished building the Pentagon. Groves was pragmatic, ruthless, and possessed a singular focus: to get the bomb built before the Nazis. He demanded secrecy, speed, and utter obedience, viewing the scientists, a volatile collection of egos and intellects, as essential but unreliable tools. It was Groves who gave Site X its innocuous, deliberately misleading name, Oak Ridge. The town that sprung up was a marvel of rushed, industrial-scale construction. It was not a conventional town. It was a factory city, and its primary product was the raw material for annihilation. Carpenters, pipefitters, engineers, and laborers, black and white, from all corners of the country, poured into the valley. They built 10,000 homes in a matter of months, along with cafeterias, schools, hospitals, and churches. A complete, functioning American suburb materialized out of the mud and woods. Yet every single resident was a government employee, and every aspect of their life was subject to military-grade scrutiny. The residents, the thousands of men and women who would be the hands and minds of the project, were recruited under layers of profound and masterful deception. They were told they were building vital equipment for the war, perhaps a new chemical plant or a refinery for naval fuel. They were paid well, offered comfortable housing, and were instilled with a powerful sense of patriotic duty. Their job, they were told, was to separate two types of uranium, uranium-238 and uranium-235. Uranium, to the average worker, was just a heavy, unremarkable metal. The essential, hidden truth was that uranium-235 was the isotope capable of sustaining a nuclear chain reaction, the very heart of the weapon. But the difference between uranium-238 and uranium-235 was infinitesimally small. They were chemically identical, differing only by 3 neutrons in their atomic weight. Separating them was like trying to separate 2 identical grains of sand in a desert, only with a blindfold and a pair of tweezers.
To accomplish this, Groves' team authorized the construction of 3 separate, gargantuan facilities, each attempting a different, unproven method of isotopic separation. K-25, gaseous diffusion. A colossal U-shaped building that stretched over 44 acres, the largest building in the world at the time. Its purpose was to exploit the slightly faster speed of the lighter U-235 atoms as uranium hexafluoride gas was pushed through thousands of microscopic barriers. It was a monumental feat of engineering, costing hundreds of millions of dollars, yet its core function, the diffusion barriers, had to be perfect to a molecular degree, a challenge that nearly drove its engineers mad. Y-12. Electromagnetic separation. This facility utilized giant, powerful magnets, the calutrons, which were adapted from Ernest Lawrence's cyclotron technology. The idea was to use the massive magnetic field to bend the trajectory of ionized uranium atoms, separating the heavier U-238 from the lighter U-235. The magnets themselves were so large they required the use of nearly 15,000 tons of silver borrowed directly from the U.S. Treasury's vaults, the only material conductive enough and available in the necessary quantity. The workers, many of them young women, sat at control panels monitoring dials for long shifts, utterly unaware they were babysitting the birth of fissionable material. They called their output product and the waste sludge, having no idea of the value or power of what they were handling. X-10, graphite reactor. This was the pilot plant for the other fissile material, plutonium-239. While the K-25 and Y-12 sites chased uranium-235, the X-10 reactor, the first truly functional nuclear reactor in the world, was built to test the process of transmuting U-238 into plutonium through sustained nuclear fission. It was here that the scientists first proved the terrifying potential of the controlled chain reaction, paving the way for the massive production facilities later built at Hanford, Washington. For the workers of Oak Ridge, life was a surreal paradox. They lived in an entirely new, modern American town, complete with a sense of collective purpose that often defined small-town life, yet every conversation was guarded, every letter was opened, and the most vital, life-altering fact about their own work was a complete cipher. If a worker asked too many questions about the process, they were simply transferred or fired. The military enforced a policy of need to know, where no one person, except for a handful of top scientists and Groves himself, understood the full scope of the project. A janitor in K-25 might clean a crucial process control room, but he would never know what the process was. A technician in Y-12 might monitor the flux of a calutron, but she would never know that the tiny, precious amount of material she was collecting could erase a city. The story is told through the eyes of several key figures whose paths intersect in this secret crucible. Eleanor, or Ellie, Vance, a brilliant but underemployed chemist from Georgia who takes a job monitoring the calutrons at Y-12, drawn by the good pay and the patriotic call, but increasingly troubled by the obsessive secrecy and the odd, often contradictory instructions. Dr. Miles Harrison, a theoretical physicist, a former gadfly who now labors under a pseudonym in the K-25 facility, wrestling with the impossible engineering problems of the diffusion barriers and the moral weight of what is creating. Sergeant Thomas L. Miller, a military intelligence officer and former newspaperman whose thankless job is to run the internal security and censorship for the city, reading the private letters of the workers, tracking suspected spies, and struggling with the isolation of knowing the biggest secret in the world while pretending to know nothing. The Displaced, a composite narrative thread woven from the lives of the original Tennessee families who were forced off their land, their sacrifices largely forgotten by the historical narrative, yet their loss being the foundation upon which the city was built.